Hello and good morning to all. I'm Diana Lopez. I'm the advisor on cities and local governments at UNDP headquarters. First of all, let me give you some logistics for the participants join us today online. First of all, we have interpretation into French and Spanish. So to use the interpretation, you will have a little button with a globe, with a world globe in the bottom of your screens, and you can check the language and then don't move out of your language. It will work even if the speakers are speaking in another language. All the participants can use the chat in your screens also in the bottom of your screens. You can introduce yourself, make questions to the panelists, and make any comments, present, share websites, documents that you want to share on today's theme. And our colleague Melissa will be taking the questions from the chat. This video is being recorded. We will edit it accordingly, and then it will be available in our YouTube channel. So welcome to this webinar today on fighting urban flooding with the cities of Hoboken in New Jersey, USA, and Copenhagen in Denmark. This is part of the webinars on the SDG local solutions organized by UNDP to highlight how local governments are making Agenda 2030 a reality for all everywhere with concrete solutions on issues that affect us all. Today, a webinar is called Fighting Urban Flooding because this has become for cities basically a fight on urban flooding. I'm actually in Malaga, in Spain, and we are under a red alert and the city is flooding as we speak. So of course, the city and all the administration are doing its best to prevent and to tackle the worst consequence of heavy flooding that is happening more and more, at least here in the Mediterranean area. Allow me to introduce the speakers of today. We have with us Ulrike Leonardsen, who is the head of Program for Resilient and Sustainable Cities Solutions in Copenhagen. And we also have with us Caleb Strayton, who is the Chief Resilient Officers and Assistant Business Administrator of the City of Hoboken in New Jersey, United States of America. And the event is going to be moderated by our colleague at the UN Environment, UNEP, Julia Rocha Romero, who is the Nature-Based Solution Specialist at UN Environment Climate Center in Copenhagen. So we are really looking forward to hear your experiences today. And without any further ado, over to you, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana, for this kind welcome and introduction. It's really a pleasure to be with you today with Luca and Caleb, and I'm really excited to talk about this very important topic, as you've mentioned, which is urban flooding. This is a topic that, as a nature-based solution specialist, I'm really passionate about, and I think that our friends and colleagues connecting to this event are also equally interested. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you mentioned, urban flooding is becoming sort of a personal issue to many of us, and many of us also have stories related to flooding that are coming closer and closer to home and to cities that we've come from or know and love. So having a conversation on how to scale local action related to urban flooding is super meaningful. And it's a problem that for us urban dwellers, people that live in cities and use cities, we are familiar with, but also city governments and policymakers are addressing these challenges on another level, which is very important for us to understand the tools that they use and the challenges they encounter and be familiarized with some of the ways that we can scale solutions on the ground. And as you mentioned, we sadly don't need to scroll super far down any media outlet to find a flood story. And this morning, as I was doing every day, just checking the news, I saw that Colombia sadly has issued a state of calamity, a state of disaster, due to all the rains that they're experiencing, with over 30 municipalities being badly hit by floods and landslides. We also see what's happening in Valencia, and the city is still dealing with all the impacts of the heavy rains they experienced. And in my home country, in Brazil, earlier this year, we had almost 500 cities or municipalities being very much impacted by the floods and the heavy precipitation. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has been waving this red flag to us for many years now, related to the challenge of how cities and countries are being impacted by extreme weather events. And the projections are very clear that these are going to become more frequent and more intense. And when we talk about intensity here, it's just the duration and also how much rain actually pours at one time. So with all of this science and all of this data, we would think that we would not be so caught off guard. But we still are, and there are still a lot of things that can be done. And I think this is why events like this are very important for us to think of the solutions at hand and how cities are deploying the solutions on the ground and how can this be translated to different settings, etc. So in the next hour, I'm really excited to hear about what Copenhagen has been doing. Of course, I live in Copenhagen, so I have an idea, and also there's a lot of spoilers that I would like to not mention, so Luca can present them, but also Hoboken and New Jersey that I've never been, but I understand has been doing a lot of fantastic work. From UNEP's perspective here at UNEP CCC, where I'm based, we look a lot into the solutions that consider nature and factor nature as some of the leverages that can be pulled. So how nature can play a role in supporting climate resilience, particularly around flooding. So here we think about, restoring wetlands and creating nature environments or restoring previous nature environments inside cities and having solutions that would really, that can be merged with great infrastructure. But I won't go too much into this. I'm really looking forward to hearing what colleagues Caleb and Luca will present. So without further ado, I'll just pass it to Luca for her intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. Okay, Copenhagen, this is a story of how we are dealing with heavy rains, which we in Denmark call cloudbursts. So literally the clouds will burst and flood us with a lot of water. We started working on climate change adaptation in the city back in 2008 and 2009, and started with sort of looking at what are the risks that the city is actually facing over the next 50 years. And we can see that rain was a very sort of urgent threat, but over time sea level rise will be a big thing for us. And we thought by having this plan that we were sort of well covered and well prepared. But then something happened in now 13 years ago, was sort of that we had a lot of rain, a big cloudburst that hit the city on a Saturday evening in July, 150 millimeters of rain in 2 hours. That's like 6 inches if you are using that metric system. And damages in a city with 600,000 inhabitants, close to $1 billion. So it's sort of relatively very high. But what was more important for us was that it actually showed us that our the damages that we had to critical infrastructure showed that we were actually very vulnerable. And in many ways, it became a game changer for the city and led to the development of the cloudburst management plan. And so how do you deal with that in a city like Copenhagen? Well, what you do is that you sort of naturally think, can we expand the sewer so that it can manage all that water? And we very quickly found out that's not a good idea. So that's why we needed to think of something else. And the solution for us was a combination of gray and green and blue solutions by mapping and modeling how water actually flows on the surface. So the map you see on your right side is not a map of streams and rivers in Copenhagen, but how water will flow in case of a heavy cloudburst over the city. And based on that, we divided the city into catchment and did a detailed plan. And a lot of that was about how we manage water on the surface. Because if we're not just using the sewers, we need to work with different solutions. We need to have places to store the water, mainly upstream, delay areas. We need to slow the water coming down from upstream. we need to transport water, and in our case, both this of slowing the water down and transporting water, we are actually looking at using roads for that, and also having rain gardens along smaller streets and so on, so that can also manage water locally. And finally, there's no doubt that you sometimes have to go underground in a city. There's a lot of existing infrastructure that you cannot just remove in order to manage all of this. The other thing that was really important for us was that we wanted to look at how we can actually use climate adaptation to make a better city. More recreational value, more biodiversity, meeting places for people, improved health, improved microclimate, and all of these other things that can actually sort of say that these spaces that we are creating for the management of water, how can they be used to also create a better life for citizens, especially when it's not raining and they're not being used for these stormwater management functions. So if you look at it, here are some of the big tunnels, smaller underground projects, cloudburst streets, retention boulevards, storage areas, and green streets. And all in all, it sort of adds up to this connected system that will take 20 to 30 years to implement and cost. I mean, here it says 1.8. I actually think the amount now is closer to $2 billion, but still sort of it's a system that will make the city safe for, or not safe, completely safe, but at least more resilient to future heavy rain events. And sort of, I want to show you how does this actually then look in practice, how we're doing it. This is a cloudburst project, the first one we made at a square where there was actually very little happening before. We managed to shuffle around with parking spaces and created this green square where there's all of a sudden place for citizens to hang out. And what we see is a lot of placemaking, a lot of activities going on here now. Very close to it, there's this other project where we have managed to reduce the hard surfaces in this square and adjoining road with up to 50%, planting more than 600 trees and, I don't know, 30,000 bushes and shrubs and so on, and creating all these green small pocket parks that are being used by the local community, but are also over time will they be assisting us in protecting the city also as against heavy heat, which is not at the moment such a big issue in Copenhagen, but it will over time be a question. One of the newest projects is this one at Karensminde, which is a project where we are creating sort of a meandering road that can also be used for transportation of water through a green area, ending up in this lake at the end where the water can be collected and eventually be led out to the harbor, which is actually very close by. And by this, we are also creating this area, making into something where people can use it, and you can really see how people are using this space, and it has won a ton of awards for good landscape design and sort of setting the new standard for how we can combine landscape design and stormwater management in a way where we can adapt to climate change in the future. Another project, an example of retention of water, is this park, where we have designed the park to store more than 22,000 cubic meters of water. By lowering some areas in the park, you can see on the left a sports field that's sort of sunken down, but also by creating this little wall around the park, meaning that we can actually hold water back in case of heavy rains. And there are hydraulic floodgates that will go up automatically when there's a need for it, and eventually the water can be let out into the system once there's much more room. And this will protect a lower lying area that has been heavily affected by flooding numerous times over the past 10 years. There's one of my favorite projects is this one. It was a street where literally there was nothing going on. It was empty. You had the trees and you had people walking dogs, and that was it. But by working together with the local residents who are always a very close partner in developing these projects, we created these 8 sunken gardens, each with a different theme. And each of the sunken gardens also can work as water reservoirs when we have heavy rains. And this is sort of another picture of the area looking from above. And you can see how the water then can be let out to the harbor, which is close by. But it can again hold back water and prevent flooding of the houses nearby. My final project that I'll show is this one. Is a park that's located in a socially vulnerable area. It was sort of very closed and nobody actually knew anything about it. But by opening it up as part of the Cloudburst project, by having all these other activities, it's now become like a destination where people go on weekends. And there are also places in the park where it's possible to have all these recreational features, and you can hang out and have peace and quiet. So it's not just all skateboard ramps and so on. It's actually also nature and that kind of quality. So what sort of my last is what have we learned and what do we actually need? We have found that multidisciplinary collaboration is essential. We need to work together across the sectors. It's a new paradigm in urban design. Projects very often have a high complexity, and that challenges all the existing practices, the things that we usually do, what we always do, and that has become a habit. So we need to think in innovative ways to find new solutions, and we need to continue to rework our plan, because the city is changing and the climate projections are changing, legislation is changing. So that's why we need sort of constantly to have this adaptive approach to it. And the fact that we have this connected system, like a parallel system to the sewer system, means that we need to be very aware of the different hydraulic connections between the projects. And of course, I mean, it should be self-evident, but the urban space potentially, of course, is depending on how the water should be managed in that area. The water management is the key of things, and the urban space is secondary, but it makes up a lot of potential for the local neighborhoods. That was my presentation. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Luca, for walking us through these various solutions in Copenhagen. I would like to invite Caleb to see if he has any questions to you regarding some of the topics you've presented in the Copenhagen experience. Caleb, over to you.
So I did some quick math while you were speaking, and for my benefit, I think the cubic meter conversion to gallons is 5.8 million gallons, which is that one project is larger than all the projects that we've built in combination. And so I guess my question is, and it's interesting because our story really starts around 2011 as well. Did the city do anything to modify its electrical infrastructure or pumping infrastructure? Power loss was a big issue we had issues with flooding, but power loss was a really big issue as well. And I was just wondering if there were changes made to any infrastructure that was on grade, because we've seen that losing power is as consequential as being flooded in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, we had very little sort of the power loss we had was very localized, sort of under bridges and so on in sort of low-lying areas. It was like traffic lights that went out. It was, I mean, that kind of thing. If electrical installations, not so much during the cloudburst, but during a small storm surge, sort of some of the mechanisms that could open the bridges in Copenhagen was flooded, and so. And as a result, basically, I think what has been done is sort of to take a good look at that and say, how can we make that more resilient in the future? Raising them up so that they're not at the same risk for flooding. But it is a big thing to make sure that sort of basic infrastructure is working at the time. I mean, and as for pumping, I mean, most of our system, we want to be dependent on natural gravitation, and there are a few places. One of the tunnels that we have, the water will be pumped up because it has to be quite deep. It has to go under the metro line, and that's why it has to actually come up from around 30 meters below and get pumped out into the harbor.
Yeah.
But in general, we as much as we can, we don't want to rely on pumping because it's vulnerable, especially also if you have power loss, and you have to make sure the pumps are maintained, and these events occur at such irregular intervals that it's really difficult to make sure that you have things working when you need them.
Very good. I see we actually have a question on the chat. And I think we have 3 more minutes, Lucas, so I'll pass that to you. It's related to public-private partnerships, and I'm imagining it's related to how Copenhagen has benefited perhaps from public-private partnerships in scaling these solutions.
I mean, public-private partnerships exist and we use them, but it's actually quite limited. Most of this is funded by the water utility through the fees that we pay for the use of water, which covers everything, also wastewater management and stormwater management. So and the city from its tax budget pays for what you can say is the urban space improvement. So for each project, actually sort of a calculation is made on how to divide costs between the city and the utility. But there are some projects where we've had like private funders in and pay some of it. But we also very often try to see if there are other activities going on, like neighborhood regeneration projects that have extra funding, sort of that, so that we can stretch and get more out of it. And they can also get the benefit from us coming in with the water management part.
So I actually have a follow-up question to that. Within your water utility, do you have a department or division that manages all of these different assets? Is it specific to the city, or is there partnerships that you have?
It's, I mean, everything that has to do with water management is by our utility. And it's a publicly owned private company, if you can put it like that. I mean, we own it, but they are, I mean, they are working by themselves. But everything has been developed in a very close partnership with them. We have also been a lot of these things go beyond the municipal boundaries, and we need to also work together with all other municipalities in making sure sometimes the solution to a problem is far upstream. We have a big project on a stream where we are working with 7 or 8 municipalities and the same, more or less the same number of utilities, on making sure that the downstream areas do not flood by actually doing a lot of measures upstream. But it is the utility that in Denmark, they are the ones that sort of maintain all of these things. The city has a sort of regulatory power.
Right. I think we have a lot of some more questions coming up, but I would like to actually invite Caleb to do his presentation, and we can take these questions at the end. Thanks, Luca, for your intervention. And Caleb, I pass the word to you. Let me know if you can share your screen.
So I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to share some of the work we're doing on climate adaptation. I think Hoboken is probably a little less recognizable than Copenhagen. So we're a very dense populated 1 square mile city with 60,000 residents. And to really understand our approach to flooding, I think it's helpful to start with some historic context. So let's go back 150 years. In the lower left area, you'll find Hoboken, which, believe it or not, was originally an island. Over time, the land was developed and expanded westward, filling in marshy areas along a cliff that's on our west bank. And it's really this historic transformation that has contributed to some of the flooding challenges that we have today. At the turn of the 20th century, Hoboken was a bustling industrial port. During World War I, Hoboken served as a major point of embarkment for the troops heading to Europe. Soldiers used to cheer "Heaven, Hell, or Hoboken" to try and make light of their ultimate destination after the war. And from an industrial port city, Hoboken transitioned towards heavy industry. And that really means that the waterfront was not designed for a changing climate, and it was designed for commerce. If you fast forward another 50 years, New York City did develop its coastline really predominantly for private use, but Hoboken's waterfront shifted to a mix of parks and public spaces, giving residents great views and open space, but the improvements to access were not designed to protect against either coastal storm surge or mitigate the effects of rainfall flooding. So I also did this centimeter conversion. I think that Leek mentioned this. During Tropical Storm Irene, we had over 6 inches of rainfall in just one storm cycle, and it was far too much for our city's infrastructure to handle. There was 2 to 3 feet of flooding over 75% of the city. That got our minds working about rainfall flood risk. But the challenge was the very next year, we faced Superstorm Sandy, which was a much with over 7 feet of coastal storm surge through the city of Hoboken. There's standing water in town for weeks. And in this photo, this is actually where I live. This is my block a few days after Superstorm Sandy, completely submerged, and the residents were being evacuated by our National Guard. And the challenge during Sandy is that there was water, oil, and sewage all mixed together. You can see an oil slick right next to our firehouse in this image. Many residents had to evacuate their homes, and the damage to the ground floor apartments and businesses was extensive. For a city with so many historic masonry buildings, connected buildings, traditional floodproofing wasn't necessarily a viable option. And so we had to develop a plan that didn't just elevate a single building. We had to fortify the entire community, which is why we started to look at what kind of comprehensive approaches can deal with 2 different types of events. And we started by mapping our vulnerabilities. So at the north and south end, those are low areas of bulkheads. So we needed to do storm surge protection. And then on the west side, where we had filled the wetlands, we needed to look at areas that we could site interventions and deal with areas that were prone to flash flooding and heavy rainfall flooding. In addition to the geography and topography and hydrology of the city, we had to look at how much our property owners paying for insurance. How well did insurance cover actual flood damages? What was the value of properties in the floodplain? And this analysis helped us understand the true cost of flood risk in Hoboken and allowed us to right-size interventions that pass muster with a benefit cost analysis. And Lika mentioned this, but you could spend billions and billions and billions of dollars to solve the problem, but it would come at the cost of basically rebuilding the entire city, disrupting quality of life, and maybe not even addressing the full scope of risk. So after we looked at the value and flood risk, we developed, through a design competition called Rebuild by Design, a 4-part water management strategy to address our unique challenges. And we called the strategy Resist, Delay, Store, and Discharge. That's some of the language that was already used in the last presentation. And we had to use analogy to simplify or describe a very complex projects that we were about to undertake. So Resist involves creating barriers like seawalls, gates, and levees that are embedded into urban features. And then Delay was, we want to keep water from overwhelming our combined sewer system, which means intercepting and managing stormwater before it enters the sewers during a flood event. Store, using our parks as part of the solution, what we call a parks as defense strategy. We've created stormwater detention tanks and green infrastructure to store excess water during rain events. And Discharge, by building pumping stations, we can actively move stormwater out of Hoboken to more efficient places, or to discharge to the Hudson River when flooding does occur. This is an example of one of the parks that we're building right now. It's key to our parks as defense strategy. we want to design something that doesn't only work during a flood. And so we've designed parks that serve as open space and recreation amenities during blue sky days, which embed flood mitigation infrastructure to protect the city during major storm events. So what you'll see is an amphitheater, a dog park, a playground, but what you don't see beneath this park, we've embedded seawalls, gates, and other, I would guess, coastal storm surge interventions. We try not to use the term walls because that tends to frustrate and animate the community. And this project is still in construction, but I'll show you an image from right across the street. And I think that the point is this isn't just landscaping that we're doing. This is traditional pouring concrete, adding rebar, increasing elevation so that the topography changes. But at the end of this, what the features will look like is essentially seeding art landscapings across from a school, and it hides that infrastructure underneath it. And the one thing to note, the reason why our community chose an inland alignment is because it preserved access and views to the water while also reducing coastal flood risk to 90% of the community. So the next part of this presentation, I kind of want to shift to how we're dealing with rainfall management. So we couldn't modify the entire storm sewer system, but we did separate parts of it. So restoring natural flow paths back to the Hudson River, and that prevents overland surge from supercharging and flooding areas that would be landward of our levee system. I asked about pumping stations because it's core to our strategy. We built multiple pumping stations to help keep Hoboken dry by moving water out during storms. Unlike traditional watersheds with natural waterways, Hoboken sewer sheds rely on these pumps to handle the majority of storm water during within city limits during these cloudbursts, you can call them, but heavy precipitation, it's all the same thing. This is a 40 million gallon per day pumping station. This was our second. Our first was a 50 million gallon per day pumping station. And this is an example of our discharge strategy. One of our first projects was Southwest Resiliency Park. This can hold 200,000 gallons of stormwater with above ground green infrastructure, porous pavement, and a below ground detention tank. This was our first try at doing those delay and store initiatives as part of our comprehensive water management plan. The next project, we did double down on that. This is just one of the blocks. It's actually 2 city blocks. And this can handle 400,000 gallons. It's the same delay and store strategy to keep water off the streets and to reduce flood risk at homes. And Hoboken doesn't incorporate as much of the street scale because our topography is very low. So we're maybe 4 feet above sea level, but then our groundwater is also very, very high, meaning that groundwater might be 2 or 3 feet below ground. So the practices for us to either depress or store has to compete against historic fill or contaminated soils or other infrastructure, but it's difficult for us to depress on grade to get more capture, which is a more cost-effective strategy. The project that I want to highlight is this is a 5-acre project, Resilient City Park, and it takes stormwater management to the next level, combined lay, store, discharge. It detains 1 million gallons of water on the surface and 1 million gallons below ground. We're achieving blue sky performance, really meaning that our projects augment existing social and cultural values in a way that wouldn't be possible really only if we did engineering practices below ground. And to describe that, what looks like a series of disconnected green infrastructure on the surface, which is in dark green, is actually a series of connected active infrastructure, which is below ground, with the tank and our pumping station. And so the surface is delay and partially store, and the subsurface is store and discharge. And this is a clean water project, so it's outside of our combined sewer overflow area because we're disconnecting the watershed around this to direct water to the site. And to give you an idea of scale, you could do a little Where's Waldo here, but there's a little guy.
Caleb?
Yeah.
Can we do 1 minute more and then we can perhaps move on to the questions?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Little guy in a construction vest And then to give you an idea of scale, this is an entire city block below grade, and this accommodates water from an entire watershed. But on the surface, you're seeing a park space, and in the bottom right, there's a depressed basketball court, which we borrowed from the Dutch. A lot of our practices were actually informed by different kind of Dutch designs. And what we're seeing is the benefits of that. We're able to accommodate more than 90% of rain events. News crews come to Hoboken to kind of see what happens for flooding, and the good news is we're not flooding as much anymore. And in Hurricane Ophelia, we actually hosted our cultural event, Arts and Music Festival, and we're seeing success in the interventions that we've been able to cite. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really excited to have the conversation. And I feel like I spoke a lot about the different things that Copenhagen was doing because it's practices that work, and we're trying to borrow from different applications around the world. And I just want to say that even if you're a small community trying to undertake these big interventions, you can do that at a different scale, but one that has impact. So thank you.
Thanks, Caleb. And honestly, absolutely, and good job on 90% of success rates on managing these floods. And I actually have a friend in Copenhagen who is from Hoboken. She's a Hobokenite, and I found this out last week. And she mentioned that during Hurricane Sandy, the whole city also had really strong smell, and it was very challenging to get back into normal. So these solutions are very interesting. Luke, would you like to ask a question to Caleb before we proceed to the Q&A portion?
Yeah, I would. I mean, you had sort of your presentation in two parts. One was about sort of coastal flooding, and the other was sort of stormwater flooding. And I'm just wondering, because seeing that in the US, there's a lot of that big rain events are also very often a follower of hurricanes. So sort of, what are your thoughts when it comes to a combined event of cloudburst and coastal flooding? Because I mean, we are working hard also to make sure that over time we will be able to actually get the water out, even though there's, because natural outlets like streams and so on, they basically block when the water outside in the harbor is high.
Right. The city was already working on the rainfall issues. Hoboken's basically a bathtub. High tide is at 4 feet, and our city's at 4 feet. So the was that the interior drainage, so delay store discharge, the reason why we rely on those pumping stations is because we are already at the point where sea level rise is impacting the capacity of those systems to move water. Basically, our outfalls are below high tide for 50% of the time. And so the interior drainage, delay store discharge, really the pumping stations, is how we overcome that higher tide. And all of the interior practices are designed to perform during a coastal storm event. So the levee and the interior drainage work together. It's a little bit, if you think of like New Orleans, where they have the levees and the pumps interior, we're similar to that on a much smaller scale. So it's a real challenge, and I think that over time we have to modify. I appreciated that you were always changing and relooking at. We actually have more strategies than what I highlighted, but separation is a big one, like trying to disconnect certain sewer sheds or watersheds that have more precipitation or more higher likelihood of flood. And we're also considering connecting those practices, which is really hydraulically challenging. But I think that we know that that's the next step. We had a tunnel project as well, and that just because of the subsurface conditions was not something that was cost effective for the city. So we're kind of pivoting to see what other strategies we can use.
Yeah, well, there are an awful lot of similarities between Copenhagen and Hoboken. I mean, because we are also quite low lying, and I mean, working on disconnection we have a very high groundwater level. We are built on clay, so the whole idea of infiltration of water doesn't really work that well.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting to hear that, because I haven't been to New Jersey, but yeah, a lot of the issues that you mentioned, also storm surges, and how you tackle both, is very, very interesting. And I'm seeing there are so many interesting questions on the chat, and I'm privileged to be able to pick some of them to you. I will start with Caleb. There's actually a question on financing. So how did the city of Hoboken secure financing for these projects? And are there initiatives or mechanisms and partnerships that you recommend for other cities to explore financing for both flooding and storm surges?
Sure. So it's a long list, but first is started. We don't have a water utility that finances stormwater, but we do have a sewer utility that manages. And so we partner with them on a lot of projects. That's partially their capital planning and their grants planning. We both leverage funds from FEMA, and there's a Building Resilience in Communities program where we've been successful for a number of large grants, like $10 million plus.
Right.
We have an open space trust, which is a taxpayer funded referendum based. It's an elective tax that goes only towards these type of practices. And then whatever financing we put together, we push through the EPA, which has a clean water state revolving loan fund, and we can finance at no cost, low cost, or with potential grant forgiveness. Sometimes our projects pencil out that we're financing 81 or 80 cents on the dollar. And then for many of the projects, we have other federal funding partners with Housing and Urban Development, the Community Development Block Grant Program. That is a disaster relief fund. The $230 million we received in 2014 was, I say, the core of the money. But only a small portion of that, let's say $10 million, was spent on the hydraulic analysis that has to be done. One of the questions that we had, we ran digital models of the interventions, and we did rain and storm surge at the same time. And so that let us know how these different systems would function. That was paid for through federal grant. So there's lots of different alternatives. I'm happy to provide them offline because there's more than what I just mentioned right now, really at every level of government, federal, state, county, and local.
Thank you. Thanks, Caleb. Yeah, and maybe it would be nice to have a full review of all kinds of funds and types of finance mechanisms that city government can turn to for these. I'll ask a question for Luke, and this is from South Africa, related to the scalability and replicability component of what we've learned from Copenhagen, which is also very similar to Hoboken. So the question is, what parts of Copenhagen's flood management strategy do you think, or do you find, are most easily replicable from on other cities around the world? Perhaps also on a developing context.
I mean, actually, we have been working with the big neighbor of Hoboken for almost 10 years, New York City. Mm-hmm. And they now have a cloudburst program based on sort of the ideas of Copenhagen. So mm-hmm. there is a scalability. It's possible to transfer some of these ideas. I think the main point for me is to work with the water, not against the water. I think that's sort of the approach. And I think it's also very important because the next follow-up question, how do we do that sort of also, is actually try to see how much you can integrate in the general urban planning, because that can also help find the resources, money, and so on for actually carrying out the actual interventions. So the basic thing is to have, like you've shown at Hoboken, sort of a plan. So saying this is a strategy, and I mean the idea of retention, delaying, resist. I mean that kind of approach, saying, okay, how are we actually going to do it? And exactly how you do it will also depend on the topography of your city. I mean, Hoboken and Copenhagen are both flat cities, but there are other cities. I've worked with cities in Africa and in Latin America, and they have, I mean, huge height differences. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning about Colombia with landslides and so on. And what we have been seeing in Valencia is also a result of differences in topography, and you might need to do different things there. So it's very much a question of understanding the hydraulic system and how it works. And then you can actually try and say, okay, if we have a problem here downhill, is there somewhere further up by can we divert the water? Can we store? Can we delay it somehow? That's the sort of kind of approach that you need to take in all of this. But try and get the general overview and then work from there together with the general urban planning.
One of the things that I appreciate about Copenhagen is streets. If you were to really look at the area that are streets in Hoboken, it's about 35% of the city. So one of the things I didn't discuss is that every road project has some restoration of the planting strip with trees, with green infrastructure. We modify where our catch basins are located to change the watersheds. Streets are a great opportunity, a relative low-cost opportunity to either increase storage or to modify where water is flowing, because you're doing that redesign process on an annual basis. And those are what we find to be the most cost effective. Least cost effective are kind of some of those heavy below ground engineered practices that I was showing. And so some of the things that we did early on was, what are interventions that are highly visible, that produce outcomes that you want, that are low cost, and start anywhere. And we didn't wait for our comprehensive plan to be finished to start showing people what these practices looked like and how they functioned. Because we did a demonstration project at City Hall where we disconnected all the downspouts, and we built rain gardens, and we built a green roof on grade so people could see the planning. And it wasn't, but 2,000 people per hour walk by on their way to commute into New York City. And so sometimes the beginning is about education, and that education you can leverage into broader strategic intervention.
Thanks, Caleb. That's such a good point, because also the solutions yield a lot of co-benefits for the local community. So more than seeing and being aware of what's going on and what the government is doing to provide for them, for their safety, for their security, it's something that they can benefit on their way to work, and also take charge of the public space as well, and benefit from this sort of infrastructure. So yeah, that's definitely really important. And there's a question on the chat that I think is really interesting, because of course we know that cities, it's not a worldwide tendency, but predominantly cities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are urbanizing really, really fast. So the question is, what do you do with cities that are urbanizing so fast when you consider the obsolete infrastructures? And I think, Caleb, in your presentation, you mentioned the historical problems that the city had, that you are addressing it now. And I guess this is a question for both you and Lucas. So the recommendations for modifying the drainage system.
Out the waterways. Give them room.
Yeah.
It's kind of that simple. But if you in rapidly urbanizing areas, don't create other problems by not anticipating future conditions. And it's not hard to see where, in every circumstance in Hoboken, they had commissioned a study in 1900 that if the city was built at about 9 feet above sea level, it would reduce flood risk from both surge and rainfall. And they knew that 120 years ago. So given what we know now and the tools that we have now, building digital environments to look at where water wants to go and how it's going to flow can, I think, greatly inform urban planning and urban design. And you can, instead of having to rehab or rebuild areas to restore floodplain function, simply preserve it or enhance it, and then set about planning out how you're going to develop. And I know that that's maybe too simple of a solution, but one of my favorite books I read in grad school was by Ian McHarg, he was a landscape architect who looked at tolerance and suitability for different uses and activations, and also using mapping to inform good urban design.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Caleb, but I also think that one of the challenges that we are seeing in global south cities is the issue of informal settlements, where
Exactly.
we are beyond planning and having that. I mean, Copenhagen works with other cities, also Sao Paulo in Brazil. And I was there in March, and we were out in a favela, and they wanted to show, it was on the edge of a reservoir, and they wanted to show us how close it was on the waterfront, and said, we're going down here. And then they came back and said, oh no, we can't go there because since we were here a month ago, somebody has built a house.
Yeah.
So I mean, that kind of thing makes it really difficult. And in a city like Lagos in Nigeria, where they have like 3,000-4,000 new residents moving in every day, it's really difficult to have that kind of control planning. And I think, I mean, there, I'm sorry to say, I think the situation in Valencia somehow also illustrates the importance of having a very good emergency system, a warning system, so that you can get people out in case of threats of flooding and so on, is the first step you need to have in order. And then you need to work with the public awareness and making people aware of the issues that Caleb mentioned, and see if you can actually get that to get people to understand it. And I mean, in Sao Paulo, they were literally moving people away from the edges of the reservoir, creating parks instead. In that way, sort of making sure that you had that buffer zone between the reservoirs and the residential areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that area is very tricky, and I think that's the Guarapiranga reservoir. And I'm so glad that Copenhagen and São Paulo will collaborate on this particular issue because, yeah, exactly, informality is a big barrier to some of these things. And in the global south, that's where you have a lot of that. So it is another layer of complications for a local government to navigate what kind of solutions you can do and implement. But absolutely, I also agree that while a lot of in my head I see different tracks that need to happen at the same time. So of course you need to have your early warning systems in place, and strengthen the capacity of the incumbent municipal agents working with that, so that you can actually secure people in a massive event as the one we witnessed now sadly in Valencia, but also having putting the effort so that the events happening later on in the future are taken care of, which is what Copenhagen and Hoboken are doing. And now we quickly ran out of time, and it's really too bad because there are so many questions to both of you. So I will have the job of summarizing some of the discussions we've had. And I'd like to thank you both for your presentations. I think that they were really interesting and so nice to see so many things in common, but also then slightly different here and there. And I was happy in both presentations that, of course, you've highlighted the important role that nature can play in these solutions. And of course, we can't have a messianic sort of perspective when it comes to nature and think that, yes, it can be the bullet, a silver bullet for all the solutions. There are a lot of the times you have to use green and blue infrastructure in combination with gray infrastructure. But the park initiative, Caleb, that you highlighted, and I wrote it, but now I can't read my own handwriting. Park defense.
Park says defense, yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, exactly. This was really fantastic because, again, it serves all kinds of other purposes, and it has various co-benefits in terms of human health and including mental health and biodiversity and providing a sense of belonging for a lot of citizens. And this is fundamental. And we also discussed how, of course, a lot of these older cities and low-lying older cities, they inherit problems from the past and how constructions were done a long time ago. And I think it was Luca that said that, yeah, first we consider just putting pipes and fixing the problem with more pipes. And this would have been a solution that maybe was fitted from that time. But now we have to also broaden our toolbox, and doesn't make the job much easier. And that's also what I'm gathering, because of course you have more stakeholders and you have all kinds of solutions to address a problem. And although, as I said, it's not very easy, and specifically for cities in the Global South, this is very complicated. It does yield positive results that go beyond the challenge that we're addressing, which is flooding. So it goes beyond flooding. And we also talked about the different ways that cities can collaborate, learn from each other, maybe replicate solutions here and there, bearing in mind that it's not copy-paste. Cities are very unique and have a very unique topography and the hydrology system. So it was interesting to hear from both cities that yes, there are many things that other cities can learn from Hoboken and Copenhagen, but with a pinch of salt, because then they will have to add their own components to these solutions. I think a lot more interesting things were said, but if these were some of the things that I took note of, and I learned so much from both of you. So on behalf of the organizers, it's really my pleasure to thank you, Caleb and Luke, for being here and taking your time to walk us through these two fantastic examples. And I'd also like to thank UNDP SDG Local Action for putting this event together. It's very, very timely. It's happening at the margins of COP, where there's a lot of focus on losses and damages related to climate change, super relevant when we think about urban flooding. So I wish you all the best with your ongoing work. And for the participants, thank you for joining and for putting your questions on the chat. I wish you all a very good rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. And yes, speak soon. Take care.
Thank you and bye.